This is Anders Wijkman, Honorary President of the Club of Rome and Chairman of Climate Geek. Anders is a member of the World Future Council and has previously served as a member of the European Parliament, Assistant Secretary General of the UN, and Policy Director of UNDP.
Anders, great to see you. Congratulations, firstly, for this new medal, this medal of honor from His Majesty the King for outstanding services to society. We read about it a couple of days, so congratulations and well done. Anders, in 1972, you were a young politician in the Swedish Parliament. Today, you're a legend in the field of environment and sustainability. Again, I put this question to you, which Inga answered brilliantly, which is, okay, think of one success story. Maybe I allow you two. Maybe you can give me two if you want to, but at least one good success story from the last 50 years.
Well, the Montreal Protocol is obviously a very important thing. And we have, as Inger pointed to, a number of initiatives in a variety of areas where we are making progress in terms of less pollution, better technology, etc. But since we are now taking stock of 50 years, and we are meeting in Stockholm in a few weeks' time, I think it's very important to be crystal clear that so far we are losing the game, or we are losing the war. Because even if we have taken steps in the right direction, all the major indicators are still in the wrong directions. Whether we talk about climate, we talk about biodiversity loss, we talk about oceans. I listened to David Attenborough the other day, fascinating man, and he said, I started to travel the world and look at nature in 1938, I think it was. At that time, the wilderness area was 70% of the planet. Wilderness today is less than 30%. And I think that is an indication. And it shows that we still don't understand that the ecosystems, a stable atmosphere, the oceans, they constitute our life-supporting systems. And if we continue to degrade them the way we do, we are losers. So we have to speak
Anders,
truth to power.
Absolutely. We're going to come back on this because we're going to have a chat. So the Montreal Protocol, though, sticks out in your mind as a very strong symbol of what humanity can achieve when it puts its back to the wheel and gets things moving on these topics. Okay, good. Let me now introduce our third guest.
This is Dr. Susan Chamba, Director of Vital Landscapes for Africa at the World Resources Institute. Dr. Chamba leads the work on forests, food systems and people, which includes forest landscape restoration, sustainable agriculture and thriving rural livelihoods in Africa.
Hi, Susan, coming in from Kenya. Very nice to see you indeed. Susan, I'm going to ask you the same question. Obviously, everyone can now go on for quite a while, but let me ask you the same question. Susan, anything in your experience in the last 50 years you feel has been a positive development from your perspective and your work?
Thank you so much, Nick. But first to point that I was born 10 years after the launch of the UNEP. So my history does not go 50 years, but still I've been working in this sector for long.
Susan. 40 years is
40 years, so since
fine.
I was born. But the history that I'm looking at actually, something that puts a smile on my face is to look at the historical discussions around climate change and seeing the role that nature has taken. It has taken center stage. I was looking at that history and looking at, for instance, the UNCCD, being formed around 1994, 1996, being ratified. And even that, at that particular time, the role that nature plays in terms of helping us to mitigate against climate change was still very marginal in terms of the discussions around climate change discussions, especially within the UNFCCC process. And so for me, when I look now, Nick, I'm saying, for instance, we are right in the beginning of the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration, where major governments, countries are coming together to commit areas for restoration. For instance, in Africa, 100 million hectares committed for restoration under the AFR 100 initiative. We have similar initiatives in Latin America and in Asia. And above all, we are seeing huge commitments now. Last COP, I think for those who were in Glasgow, you remember it was basically dubbed the COP for nature, where we are seeing huge recognition in terms of what nature, the roles that nature plays in terms of helping us to mitigate against climate change as well as adapt to climate change. So for me, that makes really smile and feel inspired.
Super, Susan. Thank you very much indeed. Now, I just want to say to the three guests with us that we were actually going to have with us a young Sami leader, Sarah Elvira, but she's actually sick today. So it's just the three of you and me. So just to hand that over. Anders, I want you to maybe briefly, Anders, if you can do this, a comment on this wonderful new report that's coming out. So 50 years after the Club of Rome's Limits to Growth, Earth for All will be, I think it's the report, isn't it, for the conference here?
Well, I hope so. Yeah. But let me say at the outset, it is a bit difficult to talk about a new report dealing with long-term issues when we are in the midst of this brutal warfare in Ukraine. But we have to address all the threats at once. And I think we are in somewhat of a perfect storm. If we go back 50 years to the Limits to Growth, which was launched a few months before the Stockholm 1972 conference, it was a wake-up call. And it basically said, we cannot continue to grow material consumption decade after decade after decade on a finite planet. Because of the obvious consequences, resource constraints, damage to nature, damage to the climate. Unfortunately, governments didn't listen to the wake-up call at that time. Hope they are more listening now. Because we have seen that the human footprint is increasing. So the Earth for All project, which is backed by the Club of Rome, the Potsdam Institute, the Stockholm Resilience Center and Norway Business School, where Jürgen Randers is one of the actors. He was already an author in 1972. We have tried to identify a set of actions that are needed to meet well-being needs of the majority of the population in the future without transgressing or crossing the planetary boundaries. And we have to do it in a way that we also promote social inclusion and, if we can't do away with it, but at least reduce social tensions. Because the social tensions we see all over the place, not only because of environment destruction and climate change, but also because of income differences, wealth differences, etc. That means that the trust level in many societies is very low. And we see that even in Europe today. And you need trust to really take on the long-term decisions. Otherwise, people will focus on the near term and skip the long term. Now, we have come to the conclusion in this report, and it will be published a few weeks from now, that there are basically 5 major transformations that have to take place. We call them turnarounds. The first one is to address poverty. We are overusing the planet, and we are accelerating climate change. And still we have 4 billion people who are very poor. So poverty is the #1 issue to address. Secondly, inequality, because even within countries where you have not too much poverty, you have huge and widening gaps between different groups of people. And that reduces trust level and increases social tensions. Third one is empower women, to give them their right place in society. Fourth, rethink food systems, to deal with biodiversity loss and to protect our soils and to produce more food. And fifthly, we have to change the energy system fundamentally, going from fossil fuels to massive investments in clean energy and in energy efficiency. And I emphasize energy efficiency because there is a tendency to forget about it, but it's so important. Now, these 5 turnarounds will not happen by themselves.
That wasn't 2 minutes.
The market alone will not make it happen. We need regulation, we need taxes, and we need a lot of collective action for this to happen. Simply because some of those actions are not viewed as profitable by the market system, which is very short-term oriented. So that's the problem for the economic system. So if I then focus in what will it mean? Well, when it comes to poverty, it means we have to bring down the poverty level by taxing the rich, but we also introduce a very interesting new concept, a universal basic dividend, which means that we ask corporations in the future to pay a fee when they make use of our commons, whether it's natural commons, fossil fuels, mining, or it's the financial infrastructure and the internet. I mean, we give our data for free. We are not paid for that. There should be a fee that would go into a fund, and then we could distribute the income of that fund equally to all citizens on Earth. It's a very interesting topic. Inequality is more or less the same. Redistribution of income and wealth. Empowerment of women. Invest massively in education for women, health, contraceptives, reproductive health. Food system. We have to move from today's industrial production to what we call regenerative agriculture, which is a fascinating concept and which offers a win-win-win to the farmers. Do away, of course, with, or at least reduce food waste. And then finally, the energy systems. Half carbon emissions every decade, and invest massively, in particular in low-income countries, in clean energy and energy efficiency.
Anders? Now, I'm going to have to cut you in a second here.
Yeah,
so the other ladies come in.
Okay. I'll just wrap up then and say, such an approach is a major shift compared to the neoliberal policies that have been guiding governments over the last 40 to 50 years, where growth at all costs have been the major objective. Now we focus on public goods, collective action, and we have to control markets in a totally different way in order for the majority of the people to live in well-being and welfare and not to destroy, but rather restore the planet.
Good. Anders? Inga, you've just heard from basically one of the lead authors of this new report for Stockholm. Do you have any responses to it or any thoughts?
No, I mean, first of all, it's a pleasure to see Anders again. But I want to make sure we leave space and time for Susan. So let me try to be fast here. But look, first of all, I think obviously the sort of list, nobody would disagree with these as actions. The question is, how do we make them happen? You know, if we read the Stockholm Declaration, and I know for sure Anders has read it, as have I, and Susan, I'm sure, you know, there was a long list there. And in most of the sort of meetings and conferences and COPs and declarations since then, we have a list of things we need. I am often given speeches that says we need, as if we didn't know. The issue is who will make the gear shifts. The issue is, are we willing to take that into the voting booth, into the boardroom, into how we invest, into how we live, into how we travel, into how we vote, into how we educate our kids, into the lifestyles and our diets and all of that. And I think these are part of the conversations that the world doesn't really like to have. The good thing is that more and more it is walking into these spaces because of necessity. We just heard from Anders when he was starting out first round, you know, that we are hurtling towards that 3-degree world. And I was there when we launched the IPCC just a couple of weeks back, and there we have it. We know that we are set to lose 1 million out of 7.8 million species. We know that we have that toxic trail of growth. And we understand that the only way to turn this around is by sustainable consumption and production. But are we willing to take that shift? Back in the day, 72, what caused us to come together? This is a time of bubbling rivers, of acid rain. The Thames was bubbling, the Seine was bubbling, you know, toxic Rhine, the Rhine River. This is a time when you had acid rain in Norway and Sweden. So there was an understanding of that toxic trail. Less about climate change was understood, although it was beginning to be understood. Now, we've taken some actions. But the wealthy world and the G20 countries have a special and unique responsibility. They missed it with the stimulus packages, the $13 trillion that rolled off governments to support governments at the time. They missed it because it didn't have that green shift, gear shift that it should have had. It was to some extent, but not enough. But they missed it. And so this is where we really need to step up now. As we are having to address Ukraine, are we willing to understand that inequity and intergenerational justice have to be part and parcel of the conversation? I'm rushing here because I want to meet before I stop. And before we stop. There's somebody else talking that we can. Could the studio turn off their microphone?
Susan, you're going to be a last speaker in this section because we've really run out of time. So, Susan, just quickly, on the whole land degradation and the forest story, does this give you cause for optimism in terms of where we are now with that? Do you think that we're turning the corner on land degradation and forestry?
No, I think the dialogue. The commitments have been made, but I think the challenge is that we are not matching those commitments with bold actions. And so, really, following what my fellow speakers are saying,
we have a very bad link from Kenya from another source, and we need to just kill that. I think it's gone. Please carry on, Susan. I do apologize.
Yes, thank you so much. That was really disrupting my trail of thought. Yeah. So in terms of looking, so as I mentioned, there's such high hopes because of the commitments that have been made. But I think it's the actions that are missing. We are still yet to see concerted efforts towards addressing land degradation. And let me just point to my fellow speakers and say, yes, that as Anders has mentioned, as Inga has mentioned, there's a very strong connection between what we are seeing in terms of land and how we can then be able to protect nature. So for instance, most of the remaining areas with high biodiversity are the same areas that are increasingly receiving a lot of pressure from farming to produce food for people to eat, not just locally, for instance, in Africa, but global supply chains. So really that emphasis on the issue of how we address our demand, in fact, demand for luxury products, demand for overconsumption of things that are driving deforestation, that are driving land degradation is critical. And those decisions do take, they do take a lot for people to say, yes, I'm going to forfeit, having my, lovely, perhaps, hardwood from ebony or mahogany in Africa, because I know that is driving deforestation, or I'm going to forfeit having my luxury soap that is made from palm oil that is driving deforestation in Africa or in Asia. And so linking this is going to be crucial. And so for me, the point I'm making is that we are not yet there in terms of taking actions that are going to help us to address deforestation or even land degradation. And last but not least is also to emphasize that as we are doing this, let's not forget the vulnerable communities that have done very little, first of all, to contribute to climate change, and are also living below poverty line, which means that they are not even enjoying those luxury products, overconsumption that is driving deforestation and land degradation. And so thinking about what we are now talking about, justice in terms of our transitions, ensuring that those who are the poorest, those who are most affected by a negative impact of our lifestyles, of the climate change, and not also the ones who are paying the highest cost. So breaking down the discussions about inequality to bringing to fore the role that local communities play in protecting nature, but also the impact that our actions or inactions have on their current lifestyle as well as future lifestyle is extremely important. So yes, we have the commitments, but the actions are still not what we need.
I'm going to have to wrap it up there. I think the ministers and the governments in 1972 have got their jobs cut out for them. And I'm absolutely delighted that we could have Susan Yu, the Executive Director of UNEP, on this program, and Anders Wijkman. We've run out of time. We have to go to our next section. Thank you very, very, very much indeed.